Cool. So here's a form. Let's add, get zoom out of the way. Let's add a field to it or an input to it. Sorry. So we'll add just two inputs in this case. Add a text and an email input. And then there's kind of two ways to do this. This is to save multiple fields at the same time. I guess there's three ways. If you're saving to a builder data collection, all you do is in the events, you go on change autosave, and if it's bound to that data collection, it's going to just work. If you're doing something external where you're saving to an external database, then you need to go through a couple of extra steps. And there's two ways to do that. Both of them will go through new flows. So I'll create a flow called change save all fields together. And then we'll do that one first. So I think this is how Drew was mentioning he does it. So there would be like an API call action. Say you're saving this out to Xano. And in that API call action, you would do a post or whatever it is. You would put your URL, your parameters, and in your body, you would have, say, text, whatever the name of the field is, pull that from the text input. And then you'd have your other one, the name of the field, say, is email, and you would pull it from your other input. And then, so you have this flow that's going to basically go do this API call, and it's going to use all the fields on the page in one API call. And then what you do is on every single input, you run that same flow. So save all the fields together, run it through this one flow, and it's going to save all the fields all at the same time to this external API call. And I think, Drew, that's the way that you were mentioning the way that you do it, right? It's like one action, take everything, compile it together, and save it wherever it's going to save. You could also use this same thing. Say you didn't want to do it on change. Maybe you wanted a button at the end where they click a save button, you know? So rather than putting it on change of everything, instead you would have this save button. And on click of that, you would run that. So I would remove it from here and here. So they just make their changes, whatever it is. And then they click save, and that's it. Does that make sense? So that's one way. You have this one action that sends everything out. And looks like there's some chats. Let's make sure. Yep. And then there's another method, which is what Dorian was describing, where let's say you want to save it one field at a time, but you want to have the same flow do all of that work, right? And that's more like what the autosave actually does. So in that case, let's make another new flow. We'll call it change save each field individually. There we go. And this one, we can do, well, we can use the API call again. It doesn't really matter which action. This is about how you reference the values. So let's change that to a post again. But this time, I don't want to save everything. I just want to save the one field. Now this can get actually really tricky. Like for instance, I could get the key from data inside the input and the value from data inside the input, which is kind of an interesting way to think about it. So for instance, I could go in, and this might get a little more complicated than it needs to be, but I could do things like go to the text input, and instead of the value, I want to get something out of the element structure and add a path in the element structure and actually go set in the JSON of the element the name of the key that I'm saving. Like you could go to this element and actually set that thing has a, maybe you could do it as a JSON property in the options of something like Xano field name, and then the value of that property of that key is the field name in Xano. So basically what you're doing, if you did it like this, is you're setting up that now I can run the same action and it references the element that triggered the action to get the name of the field that it's saving, and the value of the field that it's saving would also come from that element. But instead of from the current page, you would choose this element value. So basically what it's doing here is it would go get the data for the name of the key from the JSON that's been set into the element in the studio and get the value from that same element. So I could run this on both of these changes and it would actually get all the context of what to save from inside of that element. There's another, so go ahead, Dorian, sorry.
There's just one thing. So both of them, you'd actually set them to be this.
Correct.
So the bottom and the top one.
Well, oh yeah, sorry on this. Yep, yeah. Sorry, my bad. Well, the only issue there is, yeah, you're right. I'm sorry. Yeah, this would need to be this. But Dorian, this doesn't have the options in this.
Yeah, well, that's definitely a bug.
There's an issue here actually. So doing the dynamic referencing, you could still do it. I'm not going to go into like writing the JSON manually here, but you can still do it. We actually do this in Builder for things like in the style editor. It like references the current thing that you're in. So we just have one action that saves everything, and it just references whatever you're in and rolls up through grids and all kinds of crazy things. So the idea here is that you can reference the current thing for whatever you want, and that information is passed through to the flows that are triggered. So this is a really, deep, complex part of Builder, but at a higher level, if you think about, I've got an element the user is interacting with, and then I have this action that's inside of a flow, and that action inside the flow runs through the Builder front end queuing mechanism, where it's like, on change, send this flow to the queue. That's what happens. The element information that triggered the send to the queue, all the information about the element gets passed along with it to the queue. So that means the actions within that flow can actually reference the element that sent it the information in the first place. So it makes it to where you can do this like current, this element referencing. And it's a really nice thing when you get real complex forms and really complex things where you don't want to have to like make individual change flows for everything. So yeah, for the most part, you're going to use this save all fields together. And honestly, there is some goodness to separating them out into separate flows as well, like have a change, save name, change, save email, or like save emails, different flows for each one of those. There's some goodness to that because you might want to do certain checks or things on different inputs, or you might have one that's used for like, 9 out of 10 of the elements or the inputs on the form. And then this one input on the form, you use a separate change flow, nest in the original change flow, and then do some other set of steps in addition to that. So there's a lot of options here, but in general, you can combine it and reference however you would like to. There's really no structure here that restricts it.
Yo, can you go into that text element there and go into the JSON and show where to add that dynamic field? I was gonna ask that anyway, but I see it in a chat because it's like that thing he selected for element structure. This JSON here is the element structure, so it's like you just hit the JSON tab type of field.
And you can actually do this, like you can put anything in here, right? So like I can actually just add, my custom JSON as a property, and I can make this anything, right? So this could be an object with a bunch of other properties. This could be, my value, whatever it is. It can literally, you can just type in whatever you want, and Builder is not going to mess up your custom entered JSON here. So if you enter something here and then you go make changes to the element using our GUI, it'll leave your custom stuff alone, whatever you've typed in there. The other way to do it is if you've added HTML attributes, you can also reference those attributes directly, not using, let me go back into here. So if I go back to this, let's select this element. you can get information out of the node itself, like out of the HTML node directly. So that would get it out of like the rendered state, right? Whatever is in the rendered state of the HTML after it's been rendered. So whatever the browser is having there. Whereas this element structure, what that's getting is anything that's inside of this JSON. So you can actually reference any of our internal stuff directly to in there. And that's actually the same method that the core uses when it's doing its referencing. So like when autosave goes to do its information, or whenever any of our custom things do it, it actually uses this same structure. We just do it in the core versus doing it in the action like that. I hope that makes sense. It's a lot of info, but but yeah, it's
there's
it's
that
all
there's that one
referenceable.
last step too of like the paths, which is like in this
Mhm.
element structure, you say element structure, and then the path would be like dot attributes dot styles applied. In the HTML node one, the path would be the actual attributes a lot of times. So like if you have an image, you can say from HTML node and then a path of dot src, and it'll give you like the current src value of that image, stuff like that. So there is like one extra step, but in general, like playing around with this, you can see it's pretty powerful. Like, I mean, maybe limitless, right? Like you can do so much stuff in here if you really get deep.
Yeah, I mean, we've been using this type of structure, Dorian and I, since like the very early days of building Builder with Builder, specifically in the style editor, because it got real complicated real fast, where you're having to like reference the current thing the user is manipulating in order to get the right information out of it. And because it's like you can enter any custom property you want in the CSS editor, we had to make it dynamic, right? It has to be because it's all dynamic. And so doing it this way allows you to just reference whatever you'd like. So think of element structure is like the top level view of this JSON, and then you use dot notation to go in, like Drew said. HTML node is top level at that node inside of the HTML on the rendered page. And then you use whatever notation you need to get into whatever you're trying to get into in the rendered node. And then the core
in the
goes and
path,
processes.
in the
Go ahead, Dorian.
path, you do have to start with options though, because you can also
really?
reference ID or name.
Thank
So
you. Yeah,
that's like
so
one thing, or you won't get to the actual JSON.
yeah, sorry. Thank you, Dorian. So I said that wrong. This element structure is not already inside of that properties JSON thing. It's actually at the element itself in the structure. And I think some of you have already gone in and done some of this stuff where you go in and look at like the builder cache. And if you look at elements, what you're actually getting whenever you go into that, let's go into Rex here. So there are 3 elements on this page right here. Those are the 3 elements that I've added in this project. What you're getting when you go text input element structure is actually this right here. So it's in this case, because I selected text input, it's actually giving you this JSON. So it's our entire structure is what you're going to have access to in the rendered view. So we bring that along specifically for these purposes where you need to reference something like that. So what Dorian mentioned by the options here is the JSON that actually appears inside of that JSON button inside of the properties. That's what this is. So it gives you access to all of that, and it's just JSON at this point. So you can step in and grab anything that you need. This is super expert level kind of stuff. Like if you're getting into this level, you're pretty far in. Oh, I love it. Web3 Dev Doc. I like that. Yeah, there's a lot of depth inside of this stuff. It's already thought out at the code level, we basically just need to add UIs everywhere for these things. But it's already there and available for you if you know how to step into it. Cool. So I will jump in and do some tags unless we have some more questions along those lines. We can add some tags here. So I don't remember which YouTube video it was. And sorry, I'm moving my videos around here.
Mark, The video that that I was referencing was the using variables, manage selected categories, and display as tags was the title of the video.
Okay, so that basically, I think what it was doing was like I had a list of tags somewhere that I'm pulling from. It might be good. Did I do? Let me see if I can just find it. Do you have a link to it by chance? Maybe easier.
Let me. Yeah, I think I do. Let me. Oh, it's in my. Is it in my other browser? Jeez. I thought I had it. Where is it? I thought I had it pulled up. Hold on. I had this bookmarked. I thought.
What was it called again? Using variables, did it start with?
Yes.
I think I have it here. Let me chat a link.
Just to make sure I'm going down the right path here.
That should be it.
Yes, that was it.
Cool. Let me open that up here. Gotcha. Oh yeah, yeah. Okay. Right. Yeah, this is the one that I helped another user actually. This is actually in their project. And I was like, if I help you do this, can we post it to YouTube? Sure thing. So yeah, so I'll kind of do it at a higher level in here. So basically there's 2 or 3 parts to this. So one part is I'm going to have a tag page. Another part is I'm going to have something like, some sort of like a record detail page or something along those lines. And on that page, we're going to have a grid of those tags. So I'll put a grid on here. Move all this out of the way again. Video seems to always be in the way. And then on that grid, I'll choose the tag as the row page. And then let's add some things to this. So I'll just put a div on here to start. And we'll put a text box as well. Yeah, I'll just do it. Okay, so we're going to have the tags are just going to be these text boxes, and let's style this just a little. Use inline styling. Let's see. I'll do flex. That's just how I like to do it. Centered. Line items centered. So now it's going to be like middle. And then let's do a border around it. Just 1 pixel solid, so it has a border. And let's go with like a gray or something like that. And we'll do a border radius as well. Say 5 pixels. And obviously we'd want to style this a little more, but we'll call this tag name. And let's add margin bottom also. Just 5 pixels. Just so there's a little space between them. So obviously we'd want to style this a little bit different, but I'm basically just doing the tags here in a grid. Okay, so now I have this, the idea in that setup was they wanted to be able to click on this tag name and have it add that to the tags associated to this particular record that they had open. So when I'm in this point of record detail, the user had already like clicked on a specific record and it opened that specific record into a page. And now they're wanting to edit that record to add tags to it. And so there's sort of different ways to manage a tag system. If it's a static set of tags, you could go like into data collections and have tags. And this is sort of like your data list backend of the tags. So we would go maybe tag name here. Tag name. And that's really all we need. And then let's just add a couple of tags here. And we'll just say, like, let's go with website, call it website, app, or maybe app and I don't know, dat. Let's do that. So now on the grid, what I'm going to want to do, this is the grid to select from. I'm going to pull the list from the tags. I'm going to get all the fields and I'm not going to filter it. So now what I'm going to get is a list of all the tags possible to add. And then what we're wanting to do is make it so that when the user clicks on one of these tags, it's going to select that tag. And then that selected set of tags will get saved to the record here, right? So that means we have another data collection. First of all, Chris, let me make sure, are we using builder data collections or are we using external data? Like
That
Xano
would
or
be
something?
a builder.
Okay, cool. It doesn't change all that much if you're using something external, but you wouldn't obviously be, using the data binding and the mappings and all that kind of thing. I hope I do this in the same way that I did it in the video, because sometimes there's a bunch of different ways to do this. And so I might end up doing it a little differently. So let's make another collection called items. So in my items collection, that's where the record is going to get opened, the main list, they open that into a record detail and then they're applying tags to one of these. So let's say we have an item name. And then I'm going to make another field here called tags. And what I'm going to do is save the entire JSON of the selected ones, like whatever they've selected. We're going to save that into this tags field. And then we're also going to display the ones they've selected in another grid on the same page. So if I throw another grid on here, and we'll call this selected tags, selected, let's call it selected. And I could use a different row page for it, or I can use the same row page for it. You also don't have to, I guess we wouldn't have to, and there's just so many ways to do this. Do you have the context of how you're wanting to implement it? Because I don't want to go the wrong direction and then, take you down the whole wrong path. Because like if you're displaying it or you're not displaying it, how you're storing it and what you're wanting to use the tags for later will have a big impact on how you would build this. Like, are you wanting to filter on the tags or use them in another way or something along those lines?
So I of course would like down the line would want to like filter on them, but like the main thing is like having the user be able to either select a a list of like a default from a default list or enter their own and then
Okay.
have that be associated to whatever like item that I or like that they create.
Yep. And do you want those? So usually the best way to do it is you have like this default list, but then you also allow them to create their own. So when they create their own, I would store the thing they created back into that collection of tags, right? And you could even also like make it so that they only see the ones that you've created and the ones they've created themselves, not like everyone's. Or you can make it an open system where if it's a tag that already exists, don't save it again. If it doesn't exist, then create that tag. So it just depends on the type of system you're building. Like if that's an open system, it could get ugly, right? Like people could put crazy tags in there. You don't necessarily want to make it to where it's totally open, but it would be up to you there. So there's a bunch of steps there. One is I'm not going to go through like adding all the tags, the custom tags, but it's effectively the same thing. At the end of the day, you're basically setting this thing they're selecting from with some set of data. In my case right now, I'm not filtering it. I'm just getting all fields, but you might end up filtering it, or you might end up doing something like get the default set of tags plus merge with that the set of like custom tags they've created, right? So, and then you merge those two together, and you would use an action in a flow to do that instead of using the collections list like this. So like one side of it is set up these default tags in whatever way you need. Then there's another side of it where I'm now the user is selecting the tags and we need to save those tags. So if you're cool with it, I can skip that first part, or I can go through that first part of like create the default tags and let them select it if you have a preference there. I don't know if you need the help on that side too, I'm happy to go through that first.
Yeah, yeah, that'd probably be the best because then I'll, try to go and do it on my own, and then
Yeah,
so just to save the, the Discord space.
yeah, no worries. All right, so then what we would want to do is, so they've got this set of tags that by default comes from, this like list of default tags, but we want to allow them to add their own, right? And so what I would do is have, instead of a data collection set like this, I would actually remove this. So I'm not going to include that. And instead, what I'm going to have is a new flow. I would call it something like set tags. And we're going to do a couple of things in there. First thing I'm going to do is I'll set a variable, because this is usually how I like to do it. I like to store things in variables to start, and then I kind of like process the data and work through it. So my variable would be, tags, and I'm going to set that into the current page tags, and the value, I'm going to use this option called merge. Sorry, it's right here under data, merge. So merge, what it allows you to do is get two or more arrays, any JSON array, which the builder data collections are an array, or you could use like external Xano data and merge two sets of Xano data together or something like that. And you're going to merge those different arrays together. So the merge key is what tells this input argument type how to merge the data together. So in most cases, that's going to be ID if you're using builder internal stuff. So what we're going to do is we're going to have two data arrays here. The first one is going to come from a data collection, tags, and we're going to return all fields, but now we need to filter on something. We need to say only return the default ones. So in order to do that, I now need to go back to my collection, go to tags, and I need to have a field in here called default. Man, let me get the video completely out of here. There we go. And I would put that as like a checkbox, right? So I'd create that new field. So now I would check the ones that I want internally, like that I'm managing as the creator of the project. I would add those here and check those as default. So now back on this, what I'm going to do is add a filter, and we're going to filter where default is. You can actually use like 1 or true or any of those, anything that's a true value, and it'll find it, and leave the rest of this alone. So basically what this is going to do is the first array that it's going to go look for is all the tags where default is true or checked. And then the second thing, what I'm going to do is same thing. I'm going to run from a collection of tags, same area, and I'm going to get all the fields again because I want everything. But this time I'm going to filter by created by, and what I'm going to use is the current user info ID. Okay. So basically what it's going to do here is merge two different things. I'm going to merge the tags that are the default tags, and I'm going to merge the tags that are the ones created by the current user, right? So I'm going to have those two different things that will then, they're in a variable, right? So I'm going to have this variable called tags. And the reason I usually put it in a variable first is because inevitably I want to use that for something else down the road. Like at first, if I could just like set this directly into an element with a merge, into the grid with a merge like that. But usually down the road, I come back to this page and I want to add something and I need those tags for some other purpose. So I just by default now set everything into a variable, and then I would add another action it is the set element value, or you can actually use data as well because I'm setting it into a grid. I'm going to want to wait between these. So I set the variable of tags, and then I'm going to set that grid list, and the value I'm going to set is actually from that tags variable. So remember, in the first action, I took these two different pieces of two different filtered data collections, merged them into one thing called tags as a variable. And then the second thing I'm doing is setting the grid list using those tags. So basically now, if we then allow the user, you would need to then create like some way for the user to say, add a new tag, right? So it could just be a simple input. It could be a button and it pops open a form, or however, it just depends on the user experience you're wanting to go for there. But basically it's the normal create data record thing. And because it's creating it with that user ID, and then when I set the variable, I'm filtering by the current user, that's going to make it to where it will automatically only return the ones for them. So there's a bunch of different ways to do this, but this is one way that I would go about doing that. If the data is a little more secure, which usually tags, it's not needing to be like super secure, like it's not a big deal if someone found someone else's tags by hacking JavaScript or something, then I would do it like this. If it's secure data, then I would probably go a little further, and I would have like internal tags and user created tags as a separate collection. And in the user created tags, I would go all the way through collection settings. I would make it to where you have to have user restrictions. Only the user who created it can access those things. Like you can go as far as you want in terms of depth here with security. But for the most part, tags, I would probably just leave it open, and just this way would work fine. So now the last step here, I want to make sure that in my page binding, I nest in my set tags flow that I created there, because if you don't do this, if you don't ever put this set tags to run, then it won't ever set the value, right? So because I removed the binding, this grid would never get set. Okay, so that's kind of the first part. I'm now combining my default tags with the tags that the user has created for themselves into this grid that shows this tag name here for each one. So this tag name needs a data binding so that it can get its data from whatever the tag that was set. So if I go to tags and then tag name, so now the data gets set into the grid, it displays this tag row, and the tag name text box is set to get its value from the tag name. And so now I've got the basis set up for what I'm trying to do. Let me put a cursor pointer on here. And, pointer. It just bugs me if I know I'm going to click on that and I don't see it going on there. So on click now, we need to basically add this tag to the set of tags that has been selected for this particular record. And again, there's several ways to do this. And it really depends on how you're going to use the data down the line. It really, if no matter which way, you can use the data for filtering, you can use it for really anything you need. It'll make it more or less complicated down the line, depending on what you're wanting to do. So the two primary ways are when I click on a tag, I add to a JSON a list of tags and save that to one field on the current item record. So in this case, this is the item record detail, and it's coming from this collection called items. And when I click on a tag, I want to just update a list of tags for that particular item row, right? So I have, my item is bananas and the tag is produce, right? And another tag is groceries or whatever it is. So the tags just get saved into this tags field. So that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is to have another collection that's like item, something like this. Oh, sorry. Tags, something like that. It's like a relationship collection, where you're literally creating a reference record between the two records. So this is about database structure, and you just kind of have to know some of this stuff. It's hard to determine which way to go with it unless you already know what like the structure is going to look like down the road for whatever app you're building. But in any case, I would have an item ID field on this record, and I would have a tag ID field. So in this instance, what would happen is when the user clicks on the tag name, instead of updating a manual JSON array and saving that to a field in the item, when they click on this instead, I would create a new record called or in the item tags collection, passing the tag ID that they clicked on and the item ID that it's coming from. And now I have this relationship record between that item and that tag. Okay, so that's probably the next step you have to decide is which way do you want to hold that data? How do you want to store the data? And there's pros and cons to both of these methods, and it just depends on what you're trying to do. So maybe before I go into like which one of those, do you know how you're going to use the data later? Or
Well-
maybe Dorian or Drew, if you have any suggestions on like pros and cons of doing one way or the other.
Well, definitely, I'm definitely going to be like filtering with these. Like I said, that will probably be down the line. But I'm looking at the two options, and then with the JSON display, what would there be any like nuances if I went to do like filtering, or would it, just be, the same as just like, I guess, um, like I'm trying to figure out the best way to ask this is, would it be just as simple as like, getting, calling on an object within that, that JSON?
Yeah, I mean, the filtering is probably going to be pretty similar either way. And it also depends on how you're going to store it in that JSON array. There's actually two options for storing it in the JSON array. Also, you can store it as just like a comma separated. It doesn't even have to be array. It could really just be comma separated IDs of the tags, or you could store like a full JSON array, which is how I would do it just because it's easier to manipulate and use later on. And I'm not super worried about like the difference in storage capacity size of that array versus a simple string. But people who are like really strict on that stuff would be like, no, don't ever store it as a full JSON array. Store it as just like comma separated values because it saves space and it will be faster to execute and all that. So there's other options inside of there. The further you go down that path, the more you have to think about when you go to filtering it, right? So like later, when you go to filter on it, it also would depend on the type of filtering you're doing as well. If it's like ors or ands or however you're doing it. But the filtering in general is, I would probably end up using, like what I mentioned in a Discord response the other day. I would probably either way end up doing something like this. There are these JSON actions. If you type JSON filter, you can filter an array by an array, which is a really cool action. And the reason this is great is you could say, show me all the items. So if I go into this action, you start with like all the items or some limited set of maybe all the items for this user or all the items for this, whatever it is. So I go, give me all the items. And I want to get all the fields of that. And the array property that I want to filter on can be anything, right? So it could be like, I want to filter on a certain thing. Say I want to filter on the item name. Okay. And then what I can do is filter this starting array by any other array, right? So I could go, let's say I did by ID, I could then easily go item tags, get all the fields, and the filter array is the ID from the items tags, right? So then what I would need to do is filter this based on, I know this is getting kind of hairy, but I would filter the items tags to where the item ID is the current item ID. So if I take a step back and look at what this is doing, I'm getting a list of item tag relationship records that have been created, but only the ones where the item ID value is from the current item. So this is going to get me all the tags of that item. And then what I'm doing is returning all the items where that matches, which is going to return just this one item, right? So I know it sounds, it's like recursive there, but the reason I'm showing it to you is because you can basically filter any array by any other array and filter it inside of there in any way you want. So this gets like, literally you can combine any two sets of data as long as you have corresponding IDs across them. So whether this is a data collection filter or whether it's from a variable, if you have that array in a variable, you can specify it manually too. So yeah, I would end up probably doing some complex filtering along these lines. If I'm doing like many-to-many relationships or something along those lines, I'm going to go down that path. So it's a whole other, like that would take some time to, and it totally depends on what your scenario looks like. So yeah,
And I
unfortunately,
think-
these things can spiral pretty quick, you know, like it just depends on what you're trying to do.
And I think like for my use case that what I'll end up doing is like storing those tags as like full JSON array inside like a field inside the field.
Mhm.
Just I think that that's simple and that's simple enough.
Okay. Yeah. So then there's, let me just go through how that would operate then. And then from there you can go through it. So I think in this one where I ended up doing it was they like click on the tag and then I go through some actions to do it. But one thing I wanted to note was that if you could just do it all inside this grid also. There's like when you click on this, so if I go new flow on click of that, let's see, select this tag. So when I click on that, I want to select it. If I just set a variable in the current page, so I'm going to set a current page variable, and I'm just going to call it selected 1. So I'm literally just setting a variable of selected to 1, or you could call it true, or you could do like status selected kind of thing. It doesn't really matter what the variable name is or what the value is, as long as you're using it consistently later. So normally I always use like 1 or 0 for true false. And I'm always setting a variable name that's like selected, or whatever the state is my variable name. It's just my methodology of doing it. So now when the user clicks on a specific tag, what it's doing is it sets inside that row that one is selected. So I'm clicking here and it sets inside the row of that grid that one is now selected. I might also do something like change the color of that row to blue or something so that it's obviously selected when the user looks at it. And then the next step is you can run this thing called, grid. Where is the trigger grid row? Dorian?
Wonder if we don't have it in here.
Trigger
Maybe.
change.
Yeah, that should be in here. Did it get
Yeah.
removed somehow?
I don't know.
Can you search trigger? I don't know.
I did.
Oh, you did. You can.
I mean, I
you can
use this all the
set value
time.
of an element to itself and toggle it, so you can still get it done right now.
Say that again. Sorry, Drew.
Like set the value, do element set value, choose the element, set it to its own value, toggle on trigger change. Can you do that?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we can also run it, like I can run it in the, run a flow in the parent after, but Dorian, can you just make a note to go see why that action's under there? So let me just kind of explain what that action does real quick. There's an action that should be in this list for the grid that runs the change event of the grid element that is holding that row. So like what I would do is I set the variable in that local row, and then I run the change event on the grid itself. So over here on the grid, I can make a new flow that saves the state of that whole grid. So I can just like take the whole grid state and just like set it into a field. And that's a really nice way to then save that whole array, because it's already got like the name of the item, it has the ID or the name of the tag, the ID of the tag, which ones are selected, like everything is stored in this one thing. So the way that I would do it is I'd have a flow that's called like change grid or change tags grid, something like that. And there is more nuance to this depending on what you're trying to do, but for the most part, this would do it. And then I would use, in this case, an update record action, because I'm in the context of this item record, like I'm already in a record. So I would update the item, and the field I'm going to update is the tags, and the value I'm going to update from is from the grid itself. So from an element value from the grid list. And then the other step you have to do always on an update is the ID that you're wanting to pull from. And in this case, or that you're wanting to update, excuse me. In this case, it's the current record item ID. All right, so I'm going to update the current item ID or the current item using the tags field from the grid list value. So that's going to basically take whatever is in this grid, the whole array, and it's just going to save it to that field, right? So this is like if you don't care about size of the data going in or anything like that, that's going to save, which in a lot of cases, if it's just tags, if it's really simple data like that, it's just like ID and name, it should be fine. What's cool about this is you're going to get that selected one variable for all the ones that have been selected, because the first thing they did was they click select this tag. The second thing that would happen in this action, normally I would use that trigger grid row thing, but because that's not there, I'll use the run flow. So I can run a flow on another page after I set that variable. And I'm going to make sure there's a wait. And the page I'm going to run it on is the parent page, right? Because I'm in this row, which is in this grid. That means the parent page is this page here, the item record detail page. So it's the item record detail. And the action I'm going to run is the change tags grid, which is that one that I just set up that does the saving. So now it sets selected one, and then it runs a flow in the parent. And that flow that it runs is this change tags grid, which then updates the current record using that grid list as the tags. So it's a nice way to do it, because now I can like just have the current state for that record all the time. But like I said, there are a lot of ways to do this. And so it might be good, Chris, if you go in and set up this first part first, like let them get to this state of like, I'm now clicking to select the tags. And then from there, think through whatever the next set of steps are. And that's when you can determine if this is the right method, or it might get a little more nuanced. Like sometimes you might want to remove some things from the array beforehand, or you might want to have two arrays or two grids, one that is like the list of tags to choose from, and then the other grid is the ones they've selected, and you're, instead of saving all of them into the tags, you're only saving the ones they selected. You could do it that way as well. But in general, I usually for me, I plot it all out as best I can on paper or in my head or on like a diagram or something like that. but then I don't actually try to solve for that thing that's like 5 steps down the line yet. I go get the UI built for that first part, and it usually dictates some steps for the next pieces of it because I make user experience decisions as I'm building out the first part. Drew, anything to add to that? I mean, there's a ton of ways you can go down this path, but Drew, or anything that you would add on like methods or anything there?
For me, just like trying to decide if you're storing it in a column versus a separate data collection as a relationship. What makes me decide that, it's really just the amount of data that's being stored in the column. Like what's the potential of hitting a limit, you know? So if it's tags where they're just comma separated, very basic, then I usually store it in a column. But if I'm wanting to store like full objects for each tag, and depending how many properties and values inside of those objects, then that easily for me, then I go create a relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you're going to create the relationship, one other thing to consider too is to probably pre-cache that data, like in the root page when it loads the app. At the very end of your page load, do like a set variable all tags or something, and go get all the tags that are the default tags and for that user. So that way, when they go in, it'll just pop instantly because you've already cached all the data.
Yeah, and there's a different tags example. Like if you go into the action types, where instead of selecting from a grid, it's a drop-down menu, and when you click on one, it's adding the selected tags to a grid. So it's a completely different setup than this one. Not sure if that's what
when you go into the action types.
Yeah, like on the left, go to action types, like the main list, and then just go into like that API.
Well, oh, in here. Oh, I see what you mean.
And click on the tags link. So it's a different setup, but it's still a different method of tags.
Yeah,
so,
this is a grid, right?
It is a grid. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is yeah. So like if I click on this, so this is a grid of all the default tags, like what we set up there, right? So it's like this list of all the default tags is just organized into like a select menu. Basically, it looks like a select menu, even though it's actually like a page with a grid on it, just styled to look like this. When you click on one of these, well, Dorian, you built this, so you want to walk through what occurs there?
Yeah, basically it's just setting that value into the grid, and it's doing a merge. So when you click on one, it's setting whatever information I'm storing for that tag. I don't really remember. I think it's an object. But it's just putting it up into the parent and then merging that into the existing value of that grid.
Which I believe is what I do in this YouTube video. I think that's exactly what I do up there. So it's sort of like you have this one thing of all the tags, which is this list. And then when you click on one, it adds that to this JSON array using a merge. And then we set that using that merged data, set that back into a different grid with this like displayed tags kind of row here to display the tags. So you have two things. One is the grid of all tags, and then another is the grid of selected tags, and you're saving this grid of selected tags. So actually, I think we can see it in the JSON, what it produces here, right?
Yeah.
And it's right here in the tags. It's this one right here.
Mm-hmm.
So this is that array. So all that's being saved is the name and the array index, and that's it. So it's pretty simple there. But yeah, there's just so many options here, and a lot of it depends on the UX you're wanting to go for. Drew, did you have something to add to that? I saw you wanting to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, nothing like too crazy, but because it's such personal preference and there's definitely no right answer,
Right.
so I'll just add one more factor, which is that like if you save JSON arrays or strings of comma separated values or whatever, and they're on each record, and then say they're tags, and you have like a tag for like Web3, and you're like, I want to change that tag everywhere to be not called Web3, to be called crypto. If you're saving just those strings, that becomes like pretty hard, because you have to like find it in every record, update in every record, do all this stuff. If you use relational databases like relational collections, you just change it one place and it updates everywhere. It's like a much more sort of like technically correct way when you do those relational tables. It's like you're kind of like adding more work in the setup sometimes. I mean, maybe not even, but sometimes, and you're basically creating this like super robust, future-proof system. So for me, that's actually probably my biggest factor. And I almost always use like a relational table these days because in Builder, it's fast enough to set that up, Like when I first came into Builder, I was really happy to be able to just throw JSON in places, and I would do that in code a lot to be fast. But over time, I've been like, you know what? It's just as fast in Builder to build out a relational table. So
And I think in this, the YouTube video example, I think that I run through both like by accident. I think if I remember, I'm remembering it now. I'm pretty sure that what I do is I go in there and I do it with names first. And then at some point in there, I go, oh, wait a minute. No, I need to save IDs, not names, because if you go modify the name of this tag, you want it to display that name, the new name, not the old name. And you don't want to have to go update all these records that have the old name. So I'm pretty sure in that example, all I'm doing is storing only the ID. So it's like, click the button, set the ID in, add that to the list. Click the next one, add that ID to the list for this current record. And all I'm doing is saving a list of IDs there.
it's kind of like a hybrid to what I was saying, actually. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like I'm using the static JSON, but only IDs. and either way, as long as what Drew's saying, as long as you use IDs as the base for the reference values, then you're good on having dynamically changing names over time.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that, this has definitely helped me kind of understand like the different options I have and, how to get things working. Yeah, I definitely, Drew, Dorian, I definitely appreciate your inputs on, the different like nuances and just like the factors to consider when doing this.
Oh, cool. And as you go through it, if you get to that point and you're like, I don't know which way to go, here are my parameters, we can help you out in Discord too.
Thanks.
Cool. Well, I think we've got a run for now. A little bit over today on the office hour. We do call it office hours, don't we? Not hour. But thanks everyone. We'll
Thanks, everybody.
talk to you all online. Have a good day.
See you guys.